All right, good morning. My name is Sean Sudam. I'm from the business planning team for System Center. This is the organization that owns System Center licensing. And I thank you for joining us this morning. I gotta say, anyone who can be at a licensing presentation first thing in the morning after nearly a week in Vegas is okay in my book. Quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to have a little overview of the private cloud context that it kind of informed our product plan as well as the licensing model. Then we'll jump into how you license System Center to manage your servers. We'll do a quick update on ECI, or the enrollment for core infrastructure, which is one of the ways you can acquire System Center as well as Windows Server. And then we'll touch on the changes that we made to client licensing for System Center as well. We'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A, and that should wrap it up. So first thing, as Brad mentioned in the keynote on Tuesday, we expect the world to change in terms of the computing models that people are adopting and deploying and running their apps and businesses on. And that was really the fundamental informing factor around how we thought about System Center 2012 from a product perspective, as well as from a licensing perspective as well. And you'll see how that's reflected in how we chose to license 2012 as we go through. Really, from a product perspective, the ability for you to build and manage a private cloud really is the combination of Windows Server and System Center 2012. And given the interactions between the different capabilities and components that you're going to need to have work well together to enable you to build and manage a private cloud, we're delivering System Center 2012 as an integrated product. And you'll see how that's reflected in the licensing model as well. So before we jump into kind of how the licensing works, wanted to share kind of how we thought about licensing System Center 2012 for server management, for private cloud management. And what we really wanted to do was to create a model that allowed you to get the most out of your private cloud while simplifying how you purchase System Center 2012 and manage your licenses. And really, that's going to be surfaced through the model in kind of three ways. The first is delivering private cloud value through maximizing the capacity that you can build and use through unlimited virtualization, so offers with unlimited virt. The second area is simplifying our licensing model, making it easier to work with, getting the licensing as far out of your way as possible so you can focus on getting your job done instead of how licensing would impact how you're going to deploy and use the product. And the third thing is we wanted to make sure that through the licensing model, we delivered you a consistent set of private cloud management capabilities through every offer. So let's take a look at what that means for System Center 2012. So here we're going to start talking about the licenses that you will purchase to manage servers with System Center 2012. These are called server management licenses, and these are licenses that you assign to the servers you're managing, or the managed nodes. So the first key change with System Center 2012 is that we're moving to a model where we offer two editions of the server management license. We have a data center edition, which is for high-density virtualized servers. And this edition allows you to manage an unlimited number of virtual operating system environments, or VMs. So an OSE is effectively the combination of the operating system instance and any application that you're running on top of that instance. That's an operating system environment, and that's what you're managing. The second edition is Standard Edition. And Standard Edition is optimized for non-virtualized servers, or servers that you maybe have only one or two VMs on. And so each license of System Center 2012 Standard Edition will allow you to manage up to 2 virtual OSEs per license. So the only difference between the two editions, Data Center Edition and Standard Edition, is the number of VMs you can manage. Data Center being unlimited, Standard Edition being up to 2 per license. With System Center 2012, software assurance is always included on your initial purchase of the license. We're also, from a feature perspective, we're making sure that you can manage any type of workload. So if you're familiar with our current model, the server management licenses that you buy today allow you to manage basic workloads like file and print if you're buying standard edition, or if you want to manage a more advanced workload like Exchange or SharePoint, you're going to be purchasing an enterprise edition ML. So now you have to worry about what type of workload is going to land on the server you've licensed. So going forward with System Center 2012, we've done away with workload differentiation, so you can actually manage any type of workload on the server that you've licensed. Another key change we're making is that the right to run the management server software, so say to deploy Operations Manager, to deploy Virtual Machine Manager, that now comes with the management license. So in the past, you would license your managed servers with server management licenses, and then you had to come back and buy separate licenses to actually have the right to run the management software itself. And so going forward, that's now all included with your management license. So the concept is you just take a look at the servers you want to manage. You license them with the appropriate edition of the server ML, depending upon whether that server is virtualized or non-virtualized. And then you automatically have the right to deploy the System Center 2012 component, so config-man, VMM, Operations Manager, as well as a supporting SQL Server Standard Edition runtime. So this would be full production SQL Server Standard Edition bits, use rights restricted to support your deployment of the System Center component. So license your managed endpoints, and then you can deploy and use the software without worrying about additional licensing considerations. And the last thing in terms of key changes for server management licenses is that we are moving to a processor-based model. So each license of a server ML, whether it be Data Center Edition or Standard Edition, will cover up to 2 physical processors. And we'll walk through some examples in a couple minutes of how the editions work, as well as how that proc coverage works from a licensing perspective. Before we do that, I also want to highlight that all of the System Center 2012 components are available to you through both editions. So whether you're purchasing System Center 2012 Data Center Edition or Standard Edition, you have access to the same set of System Center 2012 components, all of the System Center 2012 components for server management. So this ranges from familiar products like config-man and Operations Manager you may have been using in the past, as well as to new components like endpoint protection for protecting your server OS, as well as app controller, which is enabling that self-service experience that you saw in the keynote. Another thing to highlight here is that it's all the same software. So if you're going to license one set of servers with Data Center Edition and another set of servers with Standard Edition, and you want to monitor those with Operations Manager, for example, you can deploy one instance of that Ops Manager component software and point it at servers licensed with either edition. So it's exactly the same bits. You can use the same bits to manage servers licensed with either edition. Okay, let's take a look at some examples, how this is going to work. So in our first example, we have 2 physical server devices. And these server devices are 1 processor servers. And when we say processor, we mean physical processor populated in a box. And we are not talking about cores. These are populated sockets on the server device. So we have 2 servers, and each server has 1 physical processor each. That's a non-virtualized server, meaning these servers are each running 1 server OSE. So 1 instance of the OS and any applications running on top of that OS. So in this scenario, each of these servers is going to need 1 System Center 2012 server management license. And again, each license covers up to 2 physical processors. And the key point here is that an individual server ML cannot be spread across multiple servers. So the license is assigned to the hardware device itself, and the license will cover up to 2 procs each. So 1 license per server is going to be sufficient for these 2 servers. So you can license it up with Standard Edition. That's going to be the best choice here because these are non-virtualized servers. If you're kind of thinking towards the future and possibly going to virtualize these servers later. You could license them with Data Center Edition, but Standard Edition is sufficient at this point, as they're not virtualized. Okay, so in the second example, we have it's a single server device. It's a 4-processor server, and it's not virtualized, so it's running one server OSE. So in this example, we're going to need 2 server MLs for this single device because it has 4 processors. So all of the processors on a managed server are going to need to be licensed. So we're going to assign 2 server MLs to the server. That'll cover the 4 procs. And again, because this is not a non-virtualized server, Standard Edition is going to be sufficient here as well. In the third example, we have a 2-processor server. This is a single 2-processor server, and it's actually running 3 virtual OSEs, right? So in this case, from a processor perspective, 1 license is going to cover those two physical processors. Right? Now here you have a choice. You can actually stack multiple Standard Edition licenses to achieve the ability to manage additional VMs. So in this case, because a Standard Edition license covers 2 processors and 2 virtual OSEs, from a proc perspective, it would only require 1 license. But because you have that third VM on the server, you would need to add a second Standard Edition license to the server to have the ability to now manage up to 4 virtual OSEs. So 2 licenses here would cover your 3 virtual OSEs. Alternatively, if you're planning to increase the VM density on this server over time, Data Center Edition would be your best option there. And Data Center Edition covers 2 physical processors and unlimited VMs or OSEs. So there, you would only need 1 Data Center Edition license because you've licensed the 2 physical procs, and you have the ability to manage an unlimited number of OSEs. Now, in the fourth example here, we have a single 2-processor server and 8 virtual OSEs or VMs running on this server. And this is where our Data Center Edition really shines, right? You could license the server by stacking multiple Standard Edition licenses. So you would need 4 standard licenses to cover your 8 VMs. 8 VMs divided by 2 per license, you'd need 4 licenses. And so if you're licensing through Standard, your licensing costs would increase as your VM densities increase. Data Center Edition allows you to license that server with just 1 license. So 1 server ML would cover the 2 processors in that box. And now you have the right to manage an unlimited number of OSEs, 8. You could take it to 10, 12, 50, ultimately. And that 1 license would cover you. Your software costs for the system center management would not increase as your VM densities increase. Okay. So hopefully that helps you understand kind of the processor-based model as well as how the virtualization rights work for Data Center Edition. So now we're going to switch over and talk a little bit about the license migration path if you own server MLs under the old model. So if you have active software assurance coverage on your pre-2012 licenses, so say you own Configuration Manager server MLs and Operations Manager server MLs and maybe some suites, SMSE or D. If you have active software assurance coverage on those licenses as of April 1st, 2012, you're going to qualify for a license migration grant to System Center 2012. And so I'll go through the specific migration paths over the next few slides. But in terms of an overview of the grant that would apply to all of them, so if you had SA coverage on your licenses at the beginning of April, you'll qualify for this grant. You will continue paying for your underlying license, the original license, through the end of your agreement. So if you're on LNSA or you're paying SA through the end of, let's say, your enterprise agreement, you'll continue to pay for that through the end of the agreement. You'll immediately have access to System Center 2012 as of of the 17th. And so you can deploy, you can take advantage of the System Center 2012 product right away while continuing to pay for your existing license through the end of your agreement. At the end of your agreement, you'll have the option to renew software assurance coverage on the 2012 licenses you received through the grant. And so this is a great opportunity for you to take advantage of deploying new components, trying out new things that you perhaps aren't using today. And through the grant, you'll be able to manage, in many cases, additional OSCs and workloads, and you'll see how that works as we go through the individual grant mapping. Another thing to note is that one of the software assurance benefits you receive by purchasing SA are what we call deployment planning services. So this is where you can get credit towards some planning services from a partner to help you look at how you can deploy and take advantage of new components that you perhaps aren't already using today. Okay, so let's jump into the specific migrations. We'll talk about the server management suites first. So here we have Server Management Suite Data Center Edition and Server Management Suite Enterprise Edition. So these are the suites before 2012 where we brought together all of the management licenses for the previous products. Okay. So the first suite we'll deal with is the Server Management Suite Data Center Edition, or the SMSD. So the SMSD was a per processor license that covered unlimited virtualization. And so what we're doing there is you'll trade in two SMSD licenses, which are per proc licenses, and you'll receive one System Center 2012 Data Center Edition license. Now, it's important to understand that while your license quantity is actually declining, you aren't losing any use rights. The SMSD, one license covered one proc, and with System Center 2012 Data Center Edition, one license covers two processors. So you'll still be covering two processors, you'll still have unlimited virtualization, and here you're going to have access to new component features we're delivering in 2012, as well as new components like endpoint protection and app controller. So that's the migration for the data center suite. The next suite is the Server Management Suite Enterprise Edition, or the SMSE. And so the SMSE is a per device license that allowed you to manage up to 4 virtual OSEs, so 4 VMs. So here, and one of the things we want to make sure we did through the grant is to make sure that you are whole or better coming through the license migration grant. So for each SMSE that you own, you're going to receive 2 System Center 2012 Standard Edition licenses. And we're doing that to make sure that you can manage the same number of virtual OSEs after the grant as you had with the SMSE. So it'll take 2 System Center 2012 Standard Edition licenses to manage those 4 virtual OSEs. Now, if you have that SMSE, that original SMSE assigned to a 1 or 2 processor server that perhaps isn't virtualized, well, now you're sitting there, you have two Standard Edition licenses under 2012, and you're going to find that one of those licenses will be sufficient to cover that 1 or 2 proc server that isn't virtualized. So you can actually take that second System Center 2012 Standard Edition license and assign it to another server you perhaps aren't managing today. So that'd be something to look into if you're an SMSE owner. Okay, so those were the suites. The next category of licenses we're going to cover are the standalone server MLs. So examples may be you have Configuration Manager 2007 standard server MLs, or you have Operations Manager Enterprise server MLs assigned to your server. So the first one we'll talk about is the Enterprise server ML, and here the license migration grant is for each Enterprise server ML that you own, regardless of which product it happened to be, you'll receive 1 System Center 2012 Standard Edition license. And so here, you're going to get access to new component features in the product you had previously purchased. Most significantly, you're going to have access to all of the components in System Center 2012. So if you're just an Operations Manager customer, you now own System Center 2012 Standard Edition. You have the right to use all of the components I covered earlier that are included in both editions. In addition, your original license only allowed you to manage one OSE. These were per OSE licenses. With Standard Edition, you can now manage up to 2 virtual OSEs, so you have the ability to manage an additional OSE or VM. Dropping down to the Standard Edition licenses, so let's say you're a configuration manager customer who owns a standard server ML. Again, it's a one-to-one grant. So for each Standard Edition license you own, you'll receive one System Center 2012 Standard Edition license. And here, you as well will get access to the new component features. You'll have the ability to use all the components in System Center 2012. You'll be able to manage that additional OSE. And beyond that, you now have the ability to manage any type of workload. So again, if you were purchasing a Standard Edition license under the old model, you could only manage basic workloads like file and print, networking, those sorts of things. Now you can manage any type of workload. So a lot of value through the license migration grant to 2012. I should also clarify that maybe you're a customer who you're using ConfigMan standard server ML as well as an operations manager enterprise server ML on the same server device. So you have 2 licenses assigned to the same server. We're not deduping the grant. You'll get 1 for 1 for each of those licenses. So again, this is going to be perhaps an opportunity for you to license an additional server through the grant where you only need 1 Standard Edition license on that server. You now have 2, and you can reassign that to another server. Okay, we have a couple of more licenses to deal with. Under the old model, in addition to purchasing server MLs to be able to manage your servers, you had to acquire a management server license to run each instance of the software. So if you wanted to deploy 3 instances of Operations Manager, you would have had to purchase 3 Operations Manager management server licenses. And these are available with SQL technologies, the runtime, or without SQL technologies. These licenses go away in the new model. We don't need to worry about licensing the server software itself going forward. But you made an investment in this license in the past and in software assurance. So we want to make sure we honor that. And so for each management server license that you own, you'll receive 1 System Center 2012 Standard Edition license. So again, you'll have access to all of the components and as well as new features in the component you had purchased previously. So this license, you can leave it assigned to the server that's running the management server software if you want to manage that server. Or if you're not going to manage that server, you can take this and reassign it to a different server. And then the last license we have to cover in the model is the VMM Enterprise Server ML. And this was kind of an outlier in our previous model. The VMM Enterprise Server ML was a per-device license that allowed you to manage an unlimited number of virtual OSEs. And so here, for each VMM Enterprise Server ML you own, you're going to receive 1 System Center 2012 Data Center Edition license so that we can make sure that you continue to have unlimited virtualization rights. Okay. So that's the grant. And again, we'll come back towards the end of the session and answer any questions you may have. So I mentioned earlier that the products you're going to need to build your private cloud for Microsoft include Windows Server and System Center. We just covered the System Center 2012 server management licensing model. But if you want to license both Windows Server and System Center server management together, so basically licensing the private cloud for Microsoft, we have what's called the enrollment for core infrastructure. And the enrollment for core infrastructure is the most economical way to license Windows Server and System Center together. It is a suite of Windows Server and System Center server management licenses that you can purchase at a discount. And so this is an enrollment that you can add to your enterprise agreement that will allow you to acquire both products together through a discount. So here we're aligning the ECI model to the changes we just walked through for System Center. So today ECI has 3 editions. There's a Standard Edition, an Enterprise Edition, and a Data Center Edition. And today, ECI licenses are per processor licenses. Each license covers one processor. So moving forward, we're aligning ECI to the changes we've made with System Center. So we'll move to a model where we have 2 editions of ECI. We'll have a standard edition for non-virtualized or low-density virtualized servers, where each license covers up to 2 instances. So you can run 2 instances of Windows Server, and you can manage 2 instances with your System Center products. We'll also have a Data Center edition, which is optimized for high-density virtualized servers. Again, Data Center edition, just like with System Center, is an unlimited instance offering. So you can run an unlimited number of instances of Windows Server, and you can manage an unlimited number of OSEs with the System Center products. Again, the only difference between these 2 licenses are the virtualization rights. How many instances can I run? How many instances can I manage? The underlying System Center components are the same. And again, we're going to be moving ECI to a model where each license covers up to 2 physical processors as well. So we go from a model where 1 license covers 1 processor to a model where 1 license covers 2 physical processors. So again, aligning back to the same model we talked about for System Center. Now, ECI does require a 50 processor minimum. So if you want to buy ECI, you need to cover at least 50 processors. That now translates into 25 licenses in the new model, because again, each license will cover up to 2 physical procs. The license migration path for ECI, again, similar to what we talked about in System Center. If you own software assurance coverage at the beginning of April, you'll qualify for the grant. Data Center Edition will work the same way as we talked about for System Center. So again, Data Center Edition for ECI was a per processor license with unlimited vert. So you'll trade in 2 Data Center Edition licenses of your old ECI, and you'll receive 1 of the updated ECI Data Center Edition licenses. So again, you're not losing anything. You're covering the same number of procs. You continue to have unlimited vert. Just the form of the license is changing there. If you are purchasing ECI Enterprise Edition or ECI Standard Edition today, you'll get a 1-for-1 grant into the updated ECI Standard Edition license. So here, you'll be covering an additional processor through the grant, because the previous licenses only covered 1 proc. The updated ECI Standard now covers 2 procs. And in particular, if you're an ECI Standard Edition customer, you're going to see a lot of new value. So the previous ECI Standard Edition allowed you to run 1 instance, manage 1 instance. And it also included just standard server MLs for 3 of our products. So basically, you only had the ability to use 3 of the previous products, and you only had the ability to manage basic workloads. So going forward, you'll have the ability to use any of the System Center 2012 components and to manage any type of workload through the grant. So next we'll talk about a couple of the core infrastructure offerings, the ECI is the enrollment that you would attach to EA. The license you would purchase would be the core infrastructure license. We have a new addition to the lineup here. What I walked you through on the last couple of slides were the licenses that you would purchase through the enrollment for core infrastructure, where you would attach that enrollment to an EA, where you would have a 25 license minimum to purchase. We are introducing a new CIS SKU. We introduced that this month in April, where you can buy System Center as well as Windows Server together, actually outside of an enrollment for core infrastructure. Here we have a 5% discount for purchasing those products together, as well as we have a one license minimum. So there's effectively no minimum in terms of the number of licenses you need to purchase to qualify. The license types and the forms are the same. Each license of the CIS SKU will cover up to 2 procs. It's basically a suite of the Windows Server and the System Center server MLs brought together in a SKU form without the minimum, and now with a 5% discount. The row on the bottom is the ECI offering that we just walked through, and that's a programmatic 20% discount off the products Windows Server and System Center purchased together through that enrollment. So a couple options there. So if you're going to cover a lot of procs and you have an EA, the enrollment for core infrastructure is going to be the way to go. It's going to earn you the highest discount. If you're not quite ready to cover that number of procs, perhaps you aren't purchasing through the EA today, we now have the CIS SKU where you can buy these two together at a 5% discount. Okay, so just to kind of summarize up on the server management side now, before we move into client management. So we've realigned the model across the portfolio to a model where we have two editions. We have Standard Edition, which is for non-virtualized or low-density virtualized servers. We have Standard Editions for both System Center on a standalone basis, as well as the enrollment for core infrastructure and the new CIS SKUs. So Standard Edition covers up to 2 virtual OSEs, and each license covers 2 physical processors. We have Data Center Edition. The only difference there is the virtualization rights. So each license, again, covers 2 physical processors. You have access to all of the System Center 2012 components. And with Data Center Edition, you have the right to manage an unlimited number of virtual OSCs. And again, we have that for System Center on a standalone basis, as well as through the enrollment for core infrastructure and CIS SKUs. Okay, so now we're going to transition into client management. So everything we just talked about is if you're using System Center to manage servers, right? Now we're going to talk about how you license System Center to manage clients. So here, we have 3 standalone offerings for System Center 2012, and those are the items in the orange boxes. So the first thing we'll talk about is the System Center 2012 Configuration Manager client management license. So we've updated the config man client ML to now include Virtual Machine Manager. So there's a new component with System Center 2012. This would be most relevant if you are managing a VDI environment. So that's the first standalone offering, the config man client ML. Config man client ML will continue to be included in Core Cal like it is today, so no change there. The second offering we have is the System Center Endpoint Protection, and that will continue to be a standalone offering as well as a component of Core Cal, like it has been previously. So that's the first 2 standalone licenses. The third license is the System Center 2012 Client Management Suite, and this is where the bulk of the change on the client licensing side has occurred. So previously, the Client Management Suite was a suite that included the standalone products, the standalone client MLs, for Service Manager, Operations Manager, and DPM. Going forward, the Client Management Suite becomes an integrated license, and those standalone products become components of that license. And in addition, we roll in Orchestrator for managing clients as well. So the System Center 2012 Client Management Suite license is our third standalone offering, and it will continue to be included in Core Cal as well. Now, these standalone offerings are going to continue to be offered on a per OSE and a per user basis. So that's your option in terms of what type of license you want to purchase. They're priced the same. So per OSE is effectively per device if you're not virtualizing on the client. So if you have a bunch of devices that multiple users are sharing, that's probably the option you're going to want to choose. You license the device, and any number of users can use that device. If you have an environment where you perhaps have a lot of knowledge workers, they may have a desktop, laptop, and a phone that you're going to manage. You're going to want to choose to license on a per user basis, because you assign 1 per user license to that user, and you can then manage all of the devices associated with that user. The client MLs, again, so the concept is you just look at the things you want to manage or the users associated with the devices you want to manage. You assign the client MLs to those devices or users, right? And from there, you're done. You have the right to run the System Center 2012 components that are in the licenses you purchased. you also have the right to run that SQL Server Standard Edition runtime to support your System Center deployment. So again, we're very much moving to a model where you just look at the things you want to manage. Am I managing a server? I need server MLs. Am I managing client devices, either per device or associated with my users? I buy client MLs, and once I've licensed up the things I'm going to manage, there's nothing else to do other than to deploy and start getting your job done. So that covers that. From a license migration perspective, again, if you had software assurance coverage as of the beginning of April here, you'll qualify for this license migration grant. Basically, if you were buying Config-Man Client ML on a standalone basis or Virtual Machine Manager Client ML on a standalone basis, for each of those licenses, you'll receive one of the System Center 2012 Configuration Manager Client MLs. So it's a one-for-one. We're not taking two licenses and combining them into one. It's for each license you own, you'll get one of the Config-Man Client MLs for 2012. Endpoint protection is just a straight mapping over. If you had an endpoint protection subscription, you will now have System Center endpoint protection. If you were purchasing any of the components of the old client management suite, those components being the Service Manager Client ML, the Operations Manager Client ML, or the Data Protection Manager Client ML, if you're buying those separately, for each of those licenses, you'll receive one System Center 2012 Client Management Suite. So again, we're not collapsing license quantities. It'll be one for one, even if you had those assigned to the same user or device. Okay, so I have some resources for you here. We have our private cloud, Microsoft Server and Cloud landing page out on Microsoft.com. You will find on that page the next two resources, which would be the licensing and pricing FAQ document, as well as the System Center 2012 licensing and pricing data sheet. So the full version of that data sheet. The other resource we have for you is an online buyer's guide, and this is kind of like an FAQ concierge. You can kind of select through the UI and tell us about, are you an existing customer, a new customer, and it'll help you, kind of whittle down and find a specific answer to a specific question. Okay, and with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. If you'd like to come and use the mic so everyone can hear your question, that'd be really helpful. So does anyone have any questions about the model or the migration that we talked about? Okay, we got one here. I think it's on now.
Does it work? Yeah. Regarding of network devices and Linux devices.
So you want to know how to license network devices, and what was the second part?
Linux.
Network devices and Linux devices. Okay, so with System Center, you need to, I'll take the Linux question first. You need to license the operating system environments that you're managing, okay? And so remember, an operating system environment is the combination of the OS instance you're running as well as any of the applications you're running on top of it. That's an OSE. That unit is an OSE. So from a licensing perspective, the concept of an OSE covers Windows Server as the OS, it covers Linux as the OS, it covers mainframe operating systems as the OS. So it's the same set of licenses. A Linux OSE, from a licensing perspective, is no different than a Windows OSE. Okay, so the server MLs apply to both equally. And then the second question was around licensing network devices, right? And there, we start with anything you're managing needs to be licensed, right? And so it's pretty clear on managing server OSEs and managing client OSEs. With network devices, we do have an exception to the requirement for a management license. So if your network device is operating solely as a network infrastructure device, and it is functioning at OSI layer 3 and below, then we waive the requirement for an ML. So You can monitor and manage, that network device, or a hub, a switch, right? You can use the product to manage those things without assigning management licenses to them. If your device does not meet that criteria, again, OSI layer 3 and below, and only serving as a network infrastructure device, then you'd need to assign a server management license to those network devices. So more advanced things like firewalls or load balancers typically would fall into that category. Sorry, your question, I think the question is, where is that documented? Right. So that actually is spelled out in the product use rights document, the PER. So the PER is the use rights document that governs your use of the product if you're purchasing through a volume licensing program. So we have a section in the PER for management servers, which covers the System Center products. And you'll find in there a little section on exclusions. So some 2 or 3 specific use cases where you can use the product to manage something without assigning a management license to it. And I can, if you want to stop by at the end, I can help you find that.
If you had a
Okay, great. So the question is, if you have a 4-socket server with 50 VMs, and the question is, can you license that server with one System Center 2012 data center license to get the unlimited vert and one System Center 2012 standard edition license? I'm really glad you asked. So if you're licensing a server with multiple licenses, multiple MLs, the edition needs to be the same. So for that one, since you have 50 VMs, you would need to assign 2 data center licenses to that server, and then you can manage up to an unlimited number of VMs and up to your 50. Right? And again, similarly, if you have a 4-processor server that's not virtualized, right, you're going to choose standard edition, you would need to have 2 standard edition licenses. You cannot mix on the same server device. You can absolutely mix within your server environment, though. So you may have a bunch that are not virtualized. You put standards on those. You have a bunch of virtual hosts in another area. You would license those with data center. Yep. So what was your question? Is client manager and the EA still? So when you say client manager, are you talking about configuration manager? Okay, yes. So, and when you say EA, are you talking about eCal or CoreCal? Right, so here in the upper left, we have the System Center 2012 Configuration Manager Client ML. That is the license you'd buy to use Configuration Manager to manage clients, right? So that's available as a standalone offering as well as in CoreCal. So if you're a CoreCal customer, you already have ConfigMan and endpoint protection. If you're an eCal customer, you have all 3. So you'd have Client Management Suite, ConfigMan, as well as endpoint protection. Did that answer your question? Okay. Yes?
If I have a different hypervisor than Hyper-V, I can just treat it the same way. Like if I get a data center license and I have infinite OSCs running on that hypervisor.
Right. So the question is, if you're running a hypervisor other than Hyper-V, does the licensing work the same? So yes. So if you have a 4-proc server that's running the 50 VMs that we talked about, right? It doesn't matter if you're running Hyper-V as a hypervisor or another hypervisor. From a licensing perspective, you're going to need data center still because you need to license all 4 procs, so you need 2 licenses, and Data Center Edition will give you the right to manage that unlimited number of OSCs. Yes?
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, so I think we're going to, a couple other things to cover real quick here, and then certainly at the end, if you want to come up and ask additional questions, feel free to do so. Some housekeeping, please complete your session evaluation. You've got the link there. You can use it through the app or one of the terminals. And we have some additional resources, general resources, MMS resources at the MMS site. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for coming this morning, and enjoy the rest of MMS.